Three, two, one, here we go. Rainman's Take podcast. Observations on the world we live in. My take on current events and other topics of interest. Also, interviews with some really cool people. So let's get the conversation going. Hey everybody, it's the Rain Man. And as everybody knows, we're having another really wet winter out here in California. So now is the perfect time to discuss today's topic, which is California's politics and water. But real quick, before I get into today's episode, I want to give a big shout out to all of you who have subscribed to Rainman's Take. Thank you very much. To all of you who are new to the channel, welcome. I know you're going to enjoy the content. So if you could, go ahead and give the channel a thumbs up. And if you could, press the subscribe button, which you're going to find in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. That would really be helpful. Also, if you could watch the video to the end, I would really appreciate it. That helps us with the YouTube algorithms so that we can continue to broaden our reach and crank out more great content for you in the future. So thanks again for being a part of the Rainman's Take community. And now let's get on with today's episode, which, like I mentioned, is about California's politics and the current water situation. So why do I want to talk about this? Well, we just recently went through a series of major storms that were being called atmospheric rivers that dumped an incredible amount of snow in the mountains and rain everywhere else on the West Coast. I also think that we've got another couple of storms that are heading our way here in the next couple of weeks as well. So the snowpack in the California mountains is the highest, close to the highest it's been in 40 years, measuring 174% of the historical average as of January 2nd. And as a matter of fact, Mammoth Mountain Ski Resort actually had to close for the day on January 10th because there was too much snow in the area, if you could believe that. So a week after the storm stopped, I sent out what I thought was a very clever text to a group of my college friends. I had attached a picture of me with amazing San Diego sunset over the ocean. It was a beautiful day. The atmospheric conditions had cleared out by all the recent storms, and it just was a beautiful picture. I sent this to my friends, most of whom live on the East Coast between Maryland and Massachusetts, so they are definitely in the dead of winter. I must confess that I love doing this. I love to rub it in that I live in such a beautiful part of the country, especially in months like January. The text that accompanied the image stated, "California's politics suck, but the January sunsets don't." And so why did I write that? I absolutely believe that a one-party system, which is essentially what we have in California, has done so much damage to this beautiful and bountiful state. And as a perfect example of this is the ongoing mismanagement of its water resources. So let's kind of get into it. Here's the current situation. Up until the new year, California and the West has been in the midst of a years-long drought. I'm sure everybody's seen the pictures of how low Lake Mead is, and that goes for many of the reservoirs here in California. The problem is much of the drought is the ugly byproducts of years of mismanagement by the state. And my contention is that because of this essentially one-party system in California, there has been no significant counterposition to debate against crazy policies. So really, anything, no matter how insane, goes because there's no dissenting opinion. There's no formidable opposition to force debate or to stop otherwise ridiculous decisions. Many people believe, as I do, that the supermajority Democratic and ever-increasing progressive and leftist government is to blame for the current situation that we're in right now. An article in the online Sacramento Bee on January 13th by Stephen Hobbs discusses the current water conditions. And quoting the article here, the Republicans in California's assembly used a break in the storms Thursday to condemn Democrats for the drought-stricken state's inability to capture more of the rainfall that has inundated it in recent weeks. It is a failure of leadership, Assemblyman James Gallagher, a Republican from Nicholas, said during a press conference near the American River in Sacramento. The Democratic supermajority and the governor have failed to make investments in water infrastructure. Gallagher, the Republican leader, was joined by 10 of his assembly colleagues on a rare sunny day so far in 2023. They pleaded with Governor Gavin Newsom to expedite pending water storage projects. Voters in 2014 approved a measure that set aside $2.7 billion to support new water storage. None of the projects that have received money are under construction. Where is the water storage that voters approved, said Assemblywoman Diane Dixon, who's a Republican from Newport Beach. So let that sink in for a second. 9 years ago, money was approved for water storage facilities. That's well before the current drought started. Also, of the projects that received money but have not started construction, the question is, where is that money now? To me, it just reeks of crony capitalism. I would actually love to see the accounting of those funds right now. This is how crazy the situation is. Here's the title of this article on January 13th from the website of ABC23 in Bakersfield. California's rain bounty slips into the ocean as drought-shocked Central Valley farmers want an explanation. The subtitle reads, 95% of the water that collected in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta from the recent storms has been flushed out to sea, leaving frustrated farmers with lots of questions. Since the beginning of January, a series of atmospheric rivers has disgorged trillions of gallons of much-needed moisture across drought-stricken California, but only a small fraction of that water has so far made it into storage. In the Delta, the heart of the state's vast water system, nearly 95% of incoming water has flowed into the Pacific Ocean, according to data from the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. That amount of wasted water is insane. This incredible excess was allowed to be swept into the ocean. Think about the positive impact that could have had on the latest drought conditions that we're experiencing out here in California. We are lacking in storage capacity, and current regulations around pumping out of the Delta guarantee that this bounty is wasted. That is a direct result of the regulations that were basically rubber stamped by the echo chamber of progressive politics in Sacramento. And it shows the stranglehold that the powerful and radical environmentalist lobby has on California's liberal Democrats right now. Here's another recent article from Zero Hedge titled, California Snowpack is the highest in 40 years, authored by Joe McLaughlin via the Epic Times on Wednesday, January 4th. Quoting the article, California's largest surface water source is the Colorado River, and supplies look good in that watershed, the state's drought manager Janine Jones said. However, the state's reservoir system is looking at record low storage levels. The state will continue to assess water supplies and should know by March how much water will be available to supply the state's water projects, Jones added. The past 3 years have been the driest since 1986 in California. State officials have severely limited water deliveries to farmers, and Governor Newsom has urged residents and businesses to conserve water. Roughly a third of California's water supply comes from melting snow in Northern California mountains. About 3/4 of California's rain and snow comes from the watersheds north of Sacramento. But about 80% of the water's demand comes from Southern California, where most of the people live. The state expects water shortages heading into 2023, forcing some urban water providers to plan for further restrictions on outdoor water use, according to a report issued in December by the Department of Water Resources. That statement was obviously made before the recent storms. The reason they expected continued shortages, in my view, is a man-made shortage of water. Aggressive environmentalist policies have taken precedence over the well-being of the citizens in California. And to me, this is just a hallmark of the current politics that are going on in Sacramento right now. 3 points I used as evidence are: one, the restrictive regulations in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta to protect the Delta smelt; two, the other drought regulations in place; and three, monies and focus going towards other environmental pet projects, in particular, California's high-speed rail boondoggle. So first, the regulations in place to protect the Delta smelt, which is a very small fish whose natural habitat is in the Delta. Environmental policies right now are set up to protect this fish, and have reduced the pumping capabilities in the Delta, much to their detriment recently of the state's population in general and the farmers in the Central Valley in particular. Here are some excerpts from a Los Angeles Times article by Haley Smith on January 20th. Quoting the article, the Delta provides drinking water for about 27 million Californians, which is about 77% of the population, and supports the state's massive agriculture industry. It also is a delicate ecosystem that is home to threatened and endangered species. The tiny Delta smelt are dangerously close to extinction. State and federal water managers said that they have been complying with environmental regulations designed to protect these species, including the so-called first flush protocol that mandates 2 weeks of reduced pumping and the onset of big winter storms. The flush provides the fish with enough time and water to move away from the powerful pumps, which have been known to chew them up. There are reasons that there are restrictions on pumping, and each of them is founded in some way, shape, or form on trying to conserve habitat for listed species, said Jeffrey Mount, a senior fellow at the Public Policy Institute of California. If we take actions which are helpful to smelt, we'll help an array of other native fishes and the native ecosystem, he said. That's fine, but there should be other water collection sites and infrastructure in place to collect this otherwise wasted rainwater and snow melt. So back to the article. From January 3 to 16, pumping rates in the Delta were reduced to nearly half of their capacity in accordance with the protocol, resulting in a loss of about 84,000 acre-feet of water exports from the area, according to estimates from the Public Policy Institute. That's enough water to irrigate 25,000 acres of farmland for a year and supply 150,000 homes. And that's just in a 2-week time frame. Continuing with the article, government regulations should not and must not deny our constituents critical water from these storms. This is from 5 Republican lawmakers who wrote a letter to Gavin Newsom and to President Biden last week. With the letter, they say, we have a moral obligation to provide Californians any relief that is within our control. And I completely agree with that. The way to satisfy both sides is additional collection sites and infrastructure. Felicia Marcus, a fellow at Stanford's Water in the West program, and Mount said that even with the 2-week protocol, the state will still have time to capture more water. Patterns from previous wet years, including 2011, 2017, and 2019, indicate that the Delta will continue to flow at high rates for at least the next 2 weeks. That means more time to fill the San Luis Reservoir, the Delta's key water reserve. This was dated on the 19th of January. Right now, we've got a bonanza of snow, and it's looking pretty good at this particular time of year. So the idea of shorting these poor fish in the ecosystem in a time of somewhat plenty isn't very compelling, Marcus said. Again, I have no problem trying to help the ecosystem, but it should not be a one or the other situation. It should not be a zero-sum game. We can protect the ecosystem and increase the water supply for the population, but it's going to take better governmental policies and obviously a smarter use of taxpayer funds. So continuing to quote the article, there is still no denying that stormwater capture remains a point of frustration in California, especially as millions of residents are being asked to cut back and conserve more water than ever. We must make the most of these heavy precipitation of the heavy precipitation we are receiving and use it to our advantage, Democrats said in a letter to state and federal officials. He called for increased flexibility on the first flush rule, but it's also important to be strategic about how quickly reserves are being filled, said Mark Gold, an adjunct professor at UCLA's Institute for the Environment and Sustainability. Gold said it would be worrisome if the San Luis Reservoir were 100% full so early in the wet season. Again, because there is not enough additional sites which could help alleviate this concern. Some Republicans in the state are even trying to get creative with ideas on how to bring in federal funds to help cover costs for these new collection sites. So we'll see how that goes. In my view, I don't even think we need to do that. And I'll get into that in a second here. The second point I wanted to discuss was the additional drought regulations in California, and they go hand in glove with the environmental lobby's control over policies. An article from the California Globe by its editor, Katie Grimes, on April 2nd, 2022, titled, California's Government-Created Water Shortage, Restricting Water for Human Basic Needs Such as Food Makes No Sense. And the article reads, California is a state in crisis and decline. California has the highest taxes in the country and seriously declining public services, which were among the best in the nation at one time. And I believe that was as recently as the 80s. Continuing with the article, right now California is facing a severe water shortage that is government-made. People forget the winter of 2019 brought 200% of average rains and snowpack, yet the state still held back on water to farmers and residents face rationing. That abundance was not stored for the next drought. California sends 50 million acre-feet flowing to the sea annually in an attempt to meet water quality standards. And this week, California has taken another giant step forward towards grabbing another 825,000 acre-feet of fresh water from reservoir storage and sending that flow straight out to the ocean. Central Valley water expert Christy Diner posted Thursday. So why is this happening? According to the article, because pollution needs dilution and fish can't survive in cesspools. The state of California directs about 50% of its developed water supply for the environment, which includes wild river flows, managed wetlands and wildlife preserves, habitat and water quality control for fish, and required delta outflows, according to the Department of Water Resource. Agriculture gets 40%, and the urban and manufacturing receive 10%. This is why they say California cannot conserve its way out of a drought. Limiting urban water use makes sense in this major drought, but a reduction of at least 20% of urban use yields only 2% net total. To date, neither the state nor federal government has announced major curtailments of the largest user of water, the ridiculous pie-in-the-sky environmental water mandates. But it's worse than that. A rice farmer in Butte County who knows water rationing firsthand, according to him, California's anti-water policies are acutely impacting every farmer and rancher in the state. California is the largest agricultural producing state in the nation, and with many crops, if we don't grow it, American consumers won't get it. Inflation is hitting the low-income earners the hardest. How much worse will it be when basic food commodity prices skyrocket over the next 18 months because the government chose fish over people? There's very limited window of time to get this policy right. Right now, farmers are planting during 2022 what consumers will eat in 2023. Once that planting window is over, there aren't do-overs for another year. The crop year is lost. Once the water is wasted meeting unattainable temperature and salinity goals for fish, we won't have it, says the farmer. Government policy is pricing the people out of the supermarket to satisfy their environmentalist masters. And finally, people might be asking, where would we get the money to pay for more collection sites and infrastructure? So, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, some Republicans are looking for creative ways to finance it. But to me, I think we have or could have the funds right here in California. Again, much of the blame, in my view, falls on the environmentalist lobby. Do you realize how much money has been wasted by the Democratic administrations on the California high-speed rail dream? It's unbelievable. To give you some idea about this boondoggle, I'll quote an article in the New York Times by Ralph Vardabadian from October 9, 2022. I quote, "When California voters first approved the bond issue for the project in 2008, the rail line was to be completed by 2020, and its costs seemed astronomical at the time, $33 billion. But it is still considered worthwhile as an alternative to the state's endless web of freeways and carbon emissions generated in one of the nation's busiest air corridors. 14 years later, construction is now underway on part of a 171-mile starter line connecting a few cities in the middle of California, which has been promised for 2030, but few expect it to make it to that goal. Meanwhile, costs have continued to escalate. When the California High-Speed Rail Authority issued its new 2022 draft business plan in February, it estimated an ultimate cost as high as $105 billion. Less than 3 months later, the final plan was revised to an estimate of $113 billion. The rail authority said it has accelerated the pace of construction on the starter system, but at the current spending rate of $1.8 million a day, according to projections widely used by engineers and project managers, the train could not be completed in this century. The project has been delayed, in my view, by political horse trading, and in my opinion, is too far gone to be a viable project. And I'm not alone. Even Democrats in Sacramento are skeptical. And this is from the NBC KCRA3's website on December 30th, according to an article titled Travel Woes Reignite Debate on California Bullet Train. To quote the article, lawmakers have said there is no funding plan to actually connect San Francisco to Los Angeles. The High-Speed Rail Authority declined to comment on this story. It's a nice dream, said State Senator Steve Glazer, a Democrat from Orinda. It's time to wake up from it, though, and own up to the fact that it's not going to be built in our lifetime. Glazer has acknowledged he's one of the few Democrats who publicly oppose the project. The concept of moving people from one location to another quickly is something we all embrace, but even the high-speed rail, fixed rail, is going to be outdated in the next 10 years or so, Glazer said. The problem, as I see it, is there are still way too many progressive politicians who would love to dismantle the private car culture in California in favor of mass transit. And they don't care how much it would cost or how long it would take or how it would impact the lives of California citizens, all to emulate the socialist utopia of European and Asian mass rail successes. Progressive Assembly member Alex Lee, Democrat from San Jose, says, if we had high-speed rail, it would revolutionize not just our travel habits, but also our economic patterns. And it's fair to point out, especially when people are being left stranded, we really need to be adopting what every other advanced peer society in the world is doing and have a high-speed rail as another option. The leader of the Assembly Transportation Committee, Laura Friedman, a Democrat from Glendale, said she's glad the plan has a new inspector general to provide transparency to the project, but said the state needs to figure out how to fund it because it's woefully underfinanced. She says, here we're expecting the public to pay for the systems 100%, which I'm not saying is wrong. I think we need much greater investments in rail in California, but we also should be looking at the private sector for some help as well. So my guess is if you polled the population in California, most people would say that they wanted their money to be spent on programs that have immediate benefit to them, like increased water collection, so we're not forced every few years to drastically reduce our water consumption. And they probably wouldn't go for programs that right now appear to be dead in the water with no chance of ever being completed. I say move the funds set aside for those unrealistic projects and put them into projects that will actually benefit the population. Friedman notes that rail in general will provide an alternative to California's car-centric culture. She said this upcoming legislative session, she will make another attempt at getting bills passed that would move money out of highway widening projects and into mass transit and active transportation. As we grow, it's vitally important that we rethink our mobility, she said. Someone needs to remind these politicians that people are actually leaving California right now. So much so that the state has actually lost a congressional seat due to population outflows. According to the Cal Matters website, a decidedly left-wing group, in an article by Ben Christopher on April 26, 2021, titled, California Loses a Congressional Seat for the First Time. Quoting the article, for the first time in its 171-year history, California's political voice is about to get a little quieter. The bad news for California, it loses a seat in Congress, down from 53 House districts to 52. Census officials said that while California recorded more births than deaths over the decade, and the state added international residents, read illegal immigration, more people moved to other states than came here. The loss of a congressional seat is also likely to fuel a narrative peddled by conservatives that Californians are fleeing an expensive Democrat-governed state in search for cheaper, less regulated climes. It is true, and they're seeing similar migrations out of New York, Massachusetts, and Illinois, just to name a few others. Even Gavin Newsom tried a public relations campaign to lure people back to the state last year. That has also failed. So, to finish today's episode, I think this article from the Hoover Institute, which is a decidedly conservative group, titled The Little Engine That Couldn't, California's High-Speed Rail Costs Rise to $200 million per mile. This is from August 16, 2022 by Lee Ohanian. He sums it up perfectly for me, the situation in California, when he says, the project sounded like a winner back in 2008, but it was never anything more than a pipe dream. Once upon a time, California could build big and create infrastructure that made fiscal sense and that enhanced economic well-being. Not anymore. The skill and competence of the state's Democratic political leadership is not close to being up to the task, and the state's environmental laws are being used to litigate anything and everything, blocking and delaying projects, driving up costs, and effectively taking dollars from the pockets of taxpayers and putting them into the pockets of those who benefit from environmental litigation. Isn't there a gatekeeper, some committee who has oversight over this project? One oversight agency is the State Senate Transportation Committee, and herein lies the problem. After 14 years of gross mismanagement, cost overruns, and delays, you would think this committee would be skeptical and demand to see a plan that leads to success. After all, the committee members' responsibility is representing their constituents' fiduciary interest and ensuring that transportation spending can be held accountable. So just how seriously is this committee taking its responsibility to represent taxpayers' best interests? Well, the last memo the committee chose to write about the project is from 2016. What is perhaps the worst managed and most expensive transportation project in the state's history hasn't received written attention from the committee in 6 years, if you can believe that. Again, another example of the negative impact of a one-party system. There's no dissenting positions and therefore no accountability. This state's natural beauty makes it very enjoyable to live here. as to why I'm still here, even though I'm watching the progressive left do serious damage to it, I always answer that question by responding that I'm sticking around to help pick up the pieces after it has collapsed upon itself and the pendulum starts to move back towards the center, which inevitably it has to. Okay, so that's it for right now, and I'll end it like I always do. If you're in the military, the police departments, fire departments, or first responders, if that's you out there, thank you very much for your service. Stay safe. This is the Rain Man. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks for watching Rainman's Take, Observations on the World We Live In. If you like the content, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below. You can also follow Rainman's Take on Instagram at Rainman's Take. Also, check out our website at www.rainmanstakepodcast.com and send your comments to rainmanstake@gmail.com. Keep an eye out for future podcasts, which will be coming out every Thursday at 5 p.m. West Coast time.